Movie. Couple movies I saw this week. We'll start with Jurassic World. I just heard that it's already broken the record for, the largest box office opening ever, like $511 million, which is insane. I wonder how Star Wars is going to compete with that at the end of the year. I have a lot of very positive things to say about Jurassic World. I'll start with that. I thought it was fun, it was stylized, it had some wonderful moments. I liked the characters a million times more than Jurassic Park 3. I thought there was some really actually well done callbacks to the original movie, many of which weren't too overt. It was just kind of there for anyone who was keeping an eye out for them. And it felt very much in the spirit of the original story, in, the kind of arrogance of humanity kind of sense of the word. Like, oh, well, yeah, we created these animals and things kind of went wrong the first time, but don't worry, we figured out how to control life and that's never going to happen again. And it totally makes sense that, history would repeat itself 20 years later. And I think at the very least, Michael Crichton would approve of that hubris, finding itself in the park, another 20 years later. A few other things I liked. I really liked seeing like a fully functioning Jurassic Park, all the rides, all the little holograms and learning centers and the tiny dinosaur petting zoo. It was really cool to see the fully functioning park, and a lot of that was like, oh, it'd be so cool if that was real, and getting to drive a little gyroscope thing around, which even in a controlled environment seems really dangerous. Like, what if you drive right under a brachiosaur that's about to put its foot down? But anyway, that was really cool. The idea of the Indominus Rex, I guess I'm just going to go right into spoilers now. I'll say if you haven't seen the movie, definitely check it out. I give it, I want to say 3 or 4 stars. I'm going to say 4 stars with a confidence of 3. Check it out if you haven't seen it. I thought it was miles ahead of Jurassic Park 3. Doesn't quite meet the standard of the original Jurassic Park, but how could it? Check it out. Now spoilers. I thought the Indominus Rex was a very interesting way to do this. The kind of thing that causes all the problems in the original Jurassic Park is just a hurricane. Hurricane shuts down all the power. The dinosaur is able to get out. There's chaos. In this case, the hurricane is, a dinosaur that they decided to create. It's a cross between a T-Rex and a Velociraptor. Liz and I actually thought it was going to be a cross between a T-Rex and a human, which would have been real freaky. But the raptor thing was kind of interesting. There were some logical problems with that because Vincent D'Onofrio's character and Dr. Wu, the only returning character from the original movie, they knew that the Indominus Rex was a cross between a T-Rex and a Velociraptor, and yet we're still pushing to release Chris Pratt's character's Owen's raptors to go fight it. You would think that they'd have some sense like, oh, well, that's a really big raptor. What if they start thinking of him as an alpha? But then there's also weird problems where it's like, well, okay, the Indominus Rex was, contained its entire life. It never moved more than like 50 feet within this area, and still somehow was socialized in such a way that it could communicate with the raptors. And then, even though it, again, had been contained in this very tight space, had the energy and the stamina to go on a nonstop killing spree for 18 hours and not get tired at all. So there's some little logical problems like that. But as basically a force of nature, destroying the park and causing all these problems and releasing the pteranodons and all that, I thought it worked. This again goes back to the problem with trailers these days, where trailers give away too much of the movie. Some of the biggest surprises in the movie I already knew were going to happen because they'd shown up in the trailers. And I tried to avoid as many of the trailers as I could. And yet, there's stuff with like a raptor coming in through a car, and the stuff with the pteranodons, and all sorts of attacks and moments, and I already knew what the Indominus Rex looked like, and that stuff should not be shown in a trailer. There was a trailer before the movie started for Terminator Genesis, which I purposefully avoided all the trailers for because I've heard it's probably going to be pretty good, and I feel like that trailer gave away like 80% of the major plot reversals in the movie, which is a shame because now I feel like if I see that movie, I'm not going to enjoy it as much as I would have otherwise. A few other things that struck me about the movie. The kids, obviously they weren't a Tim and Lex, but there was an interesting parallel there with the parents getting divorced and rebonding here, and then maybe, who knows, maybe the parents get back together at the end because they're so happy their kids are okay. You have an adult figure that doesn't think that they can handle children and then has to handle children. That was much more subtly done with Dr. Alan Grant and the kids in the original Jurassic Park. Not as much with Bryce Dallas Howard in here. And this movie, the way it was color graded, the level of CG and the kind of insane level of activity everywhere, this didn't feel like it took place in the real world. Jurassic Park felt real. It still feels real. It feels like the characters and everything happening is very realistic. This felt to me almost more like a superhero movie, and it was color graded that way. If you watch the way the CG was done and the way everything's colored in the movie, it has this very stylized, kind of oversaturated style that doesn't really allow you to think of it as something real. And that in some ways lowers the stakes. It means that you don't feel like anyone's ever really in danger. I think the most in danger I ever felt in the movie was when the raptors started following the Indominus Rex as the alpha for some, ridiculous reason. Some of the callbacks that I noticed in the original movie, we saw Mr. DNA, the John Hammond big gold statue, so cool to see the When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth, the old visitor center. I'm such a sucker for like going back and revisiting old locations. My favorite part of Metal Gear Solid 4 is going back to Shadow Moses Island 10 years later, and it's all decrepit and snowed over and nothing's working. And I have such a nostalgic feel for that kind of thing. Saying goodbye to the dead Apatosaur, very similar to the sick Triceratops, when the Indominus Rex is slamming down the gyroscope thing, and then they kind of, say like, get out now. It felt a lot like the car coming down in the first Jurassic Park. Also the like, we have to jump, 3, 2, and then they jump off the waterfall, very similar to what happens with Tim. Also, the relationship between Ellie Sattler and Alan Grant, I think, was most paralleled here with Chris Pratt's character and Bryce Dallas Howard's character. But their romance and relationship and the way their characters developed felt very more stock character, stylized, comic booky than Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler. Like, you knew there was a relationship there. They never had to kiss or anything. In this movie, they felt like there had to be a kiss, and they had to be some, like, weird sexual tension and strange, pickup lines and that kind of thing. So I felt like every beat in this film and the script felt like it was focus grouped and, worked over by 12 writers 100 times. I believe David Cope was the only screenwriter on Jurassic Park. This movie had 4 credited screenwriters, and of course, has had different iterations for like the past 14 years after the total disaster of Jurassic Park 3. I'm glad it got worked over. So the overall result, I think, totally worked. My biggest regret for the movie is the lack of animatronics, of real things. In the original Jurassic Park, CG was only really used for the wide shots. Anything that was close up, they had like actual physical things. And I think that helps the acting. I think the acting really feels like more connective. But it also just made things feel more real and more dangerous. The 4 velociraptors in this movie never felt real to me. Like, it was cool and they felt like characters and they had names, and the relationship that Owen had with them was kind of cool. I wonder if Owen, by the way, is a callback to Nick Van Owen. Also, there's a random theory online that Chris Pratt's character is the kid that Alan Grant is like threatening with a velociraptor claw on the dig site in the beginning of the movie, because he talks about how important it is to respect them, show a little respect. And then Chris Pratt's character in this is talking about how important it is to respect the raptors, and they're actually the perfect age. So that's kind of a cool fan theory. But the raptors never felt real, even though there's all this breathing going on and like they've got all these tiny muscle movements. There's kind of a lack of physics, like the weight to them never felt quite right, and the coloring was kind of strange. They kind of looked like lizards, and even big things like when you have the mosasaurus coming up and like biting the shark. Like, I saw someone posting online, like, can you imagine how that would have felt if that was a giant frigging like practical robot coming up and actually like grabbing that thing, and then the splashes are real and all that stuff is real, because it was so clear in that the water's not real, the mosasaurus isn't real, the shark isn't real. And it's, as someone has said, I think in reference to the Avengers 2, you can only get so invested in watching CG characters do things to other CG characters on a CG backdrop, and I think that's absolutely right. And it really is a shame that there's such an over-reliance on CG now, because I think it really works best as a side dish, not a main course. And I feel like 90% of this movie had, pretty intense CG going on. So, and you know what, if you are going to have CG, pick your shots better, because a lot of the way that those were done, everything from the angles to how close you were, felt strange. And again, I think that speaks to Steven Spielberg not being directly involved with this. I think he's a producer, but he has such an incredible eye for how to frame things, and, panning up in certain ways and zooming out for certain ways, and what should be a wide shot, what should be a close-up. And that movie definitely felt like it was lacking that. Anyway, all that being said, I think it was a really good time. We might even go back, maybe in a couple weeks or something like that. But I think this would be a cool movie to see in IMAX. I know they're going to be doing sequels now. It's probably going to be like some kind of Rambo military thing. But I just want it to be good. I just want it to be good. I don't know what's going to happen with the future. But the music was kind of interesting. So the music was done by Michael Giacchino, who, you know, did Lost and a bunch of the Pixar films, and actually kind of started out as a video game composer. Really interesting. One of the early video games he did was The Lost World, the PlayStation game, and Warpath, which was like a Street Fighter-style Jurassic Park game. Both of those games I loved. The Lost World much more. Warpath I only played for maybe a couple hours. But that's kind of cool that he then got to go on and do the music for the new Jurassic Park movie. What was interesting to me was I couldn't pick out any new themes in this movie. Like, I heard the original Jurassic Park theme done several times. I heard a little bit of stuff from The Lost World with the raptors in the long grass, and that was kind of cool. But yeah, no new themes that struck me. Interesting to compare that to the Avengers, where there was a lot of new music, none of it memorable, and I don't think they really used the original Avengers theme that well, if at all. So that's an interesting choice, to be like, oh, we're not going to do anything that like people are going to remember specific to this movie. But I guess what this movie had was a certain level of self-awareness. Like, it was never trying to be better than the original Jurassic Park. I think it kind of knew that as a sequel, all it could do was be like kind of a compliment to that film, and I think that helped it. I think that helped it a lot. It knew its tone, it knew its style, it was fairly consistent with it. So again, I'm going to give it 4 stars with confidence 3. Jurassic World, not that bad, guys. Check it out. So the other movie I saw this week was Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal. A few people had told me that they thought I'd like this movie, and they were right. This movie was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was dark, and it didn't follow like a traditional story arc where a character, you know, learns to love something or changes and becomes a better person, or even, you know, becomes a worse person, like a Breaking Bad kind of thing, Mr. Chips to Scarface. This is a movie about an incredibly charismatic sociopath, or maybe psychopath, that continues to behave the same way the entire movie, and the only thing that changes is he goes from having no money and no influence to having a very, you know, kind of well-regarded company. And it's because he's very comfortable doing things that would really disgust a lot of people. And it's not just the nature of his job. You know, the job that he finds himself excelling in is recording graphic, horrible things that happen late at night, so that the morning news the next day has footage about those things and can try to up their ratings. But the way that he treats the employees and his competitors, and, you know, he sabotages someone's car, and there's you know, he holds out information from the police that could help save people's lives, and he just doesn't care. Like, he just doesn't care about that at all. And yet Jake Gyllenhaal in this role, he's like incredibly skinny, he's got this great smile, and he's like very charismatic, and it's this mark of someone with a personality that understands how to manipulate people and understands how to get what he wants, but has no empathy and does not care at all about those people. And what the movie really made me think about, especially watching this kind of American dream of like pulling himself up by his own bootstraps and going off and starting his own company, and then, you know, succeeding and hiring more employees, that got me thinking about like the typical American CEO. The American CEO is the job that has the highest percentage of sociopaths in it. And it totally makes sense, because that's how you can climb a ladder. If you don't care about the people around you, if you don't care about ruining other people's lives, if you can focus entirely on something like profit at the expense of all else, and that's, you know, the contract of a corporation. Like, it basically says that your primary goal always needs to be making more money, you know, helping out the shareholders, all that kind of thing. And yeah, anyway, so Nightcrawler was beautifully shot, incredibly disturbing. I watched it at work. I should have just watched it at home, not just because of the graphic content, but because it's incredibly engrossing and captivating. The performances are all fantastic. Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's unlike any movie I've ever seen. I give it 5 stars with a confidence of 4.